All right, guys, last video. You did it. You made it here. We're almost to the end. We can do this. All right, so today we're going to take a look at solving equations by factoring. Can you see that? All right, so do you remember long time ago, I gave you guys, I think we were still in school, in class, an equation like that and threw it out at you and said, try to solve that. And we got stuck. I mean, a few people said, oh, you know, we're able to play around with it and find one of the solutions by just guess and check. But, you know, we said, well, if you subtract 10, then we have x squared plus 7x equals negative 10. And then we know we can't combine those, so we didn't know what to do and we got stuck. And this was before we actually started all this factoring stuff, which is exactly what the whole point of this is that we are learning. Why are we learning all this factoring? Why, if we have an answer, do we want to work backwards and get a multiplication problem? Because to solve these kind of equations in this form, that's really difficult to solve. But if I factor this trinomial, x plus 5, x plus 2, then I can use the zero product rule. Do you remember that? We did these problems already. If you're going to get a zero answer from multiplying two things together, the only way that happens is if one of them is zero. So that tells me that x plus 5 has to equal 0, or x plus 2 has to equal 0. So x is either negative 5 or x is negative 2 when I solve those. So now we're actually going to make use of all these 3 weeks of learning how to factor to put it to use to solve equations. So that is one example. All right, let's look at some more examples of how we're going to use this factoring to do these. All right, so suppose I have 3x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. So now I'm putting these trinomials into an equation. So I'm going to solve this by factoring first. Factor first. So this one's not too difficult because the only way to split 3x squared up is 3x and x. Now I just got to figure out whether to put 2 here and 1 there, or 1 here and 2 here. And I think I want to put 2 and 1. That'll give me 2x and 3x, and I can get a 1x from that because the signs have to be different. So I want a negative there and a positive there to give me 1x. So that's a positive and that's a negative. So I just factored it. But now I actually, because it's an equation, I actually want to solve this. So now I have to figure out when each of these is going to be 0. Because the only way you get an answer of 0 is if one of these is 0. So when does 3x plus 2 equal 0? If this one's 0, then I add negative 2 and divide by 3, and I get negative 2/3 as one of my answers. Or x minus 1 equals 0, and if I add 1, I get x is 1. Now, some of you guys are getting really good about doing this. You're able to do these little mini equations in your head, and that's fine. You don't need to show me that work if you can do that part in your head, so that's okay. All right, so my solutions to this equation are negative 2/3 or 1. Okay, let's try next example. Ooh, here's an interesting one. Got to solve that, okay? So first thing I want to do is factor this. Okay, whoops, nope, got the wrong problem. I need that to be 200, sorry. Okay, so what do you always try to do? Always try what first? GCF. GCF first. So can I take a GCF out of here? It makes life way easier. Yep, I can take a 2 out. And that's going to leave x squared minus 100 equals 0. Now, this is not, remember, you always want, when you take a GCF out, you have to look at what is in the parentheses and say, can I factor this again? This is the difference of 2 squares. So this is like having a 0x there. So if I put an x and an x and a 10 and a 10 and make one negative and one positive, the inners and the outers are going to cancel each other out. Negative 10x and positive 10x gives me that 0 middle term. So now I'm completely factored. So now I have 3 factors. I have a 2, an x minus 10, and an x plus 10. But 2 is a constant. 2 is 2. 2 can't ever be 0. So this is not going to have anything to do with the solutions. So it's either this one will be 0, and that's going to happen when x is 10, or this has to be 0, and that will happen when x is negative 10. So my 2 solutions are 10 and negative 10. Okay? Ready for the next one? Now the good thing about these videos is like you can pause and you can go back if I'm going too fast. I just don't want to make these videos too long. Okay? Here's next example. And you know what? This one's pretty easy, but every time I've given something like this to my Honors Algebra 2 guys, they miss it. It's not that difficult, but somehow they miss it. Okay, so this is a little bit odd because it's only got 2 terms, and it's not the middle term I'm missing. I've got the 5x. I'm missing the last term. But again, what do we want to do? Always try GCF first. So what's the GCF here? What do they have in common? An x. So I'm going to take an x out. That leaves an x there, minus 5 there. This times this will give me this. Now I've got my 2 factors. This is like one of the factors. This is kind of like the last one, except I have an x instead of a 2. But could this be 0? Yes, it could be 0 if x were 0. So if x was 0, whatever this is, 0 times that would be 0. Or x minus 5 is 0, which means x would have to be 5. So I'm still getting 2 solutions, 0 or 5. That was a little bit tricky one. Okay, ready? Here we go. Pause if you need. Look that over. Okay, now here's one. Now this is our old familiar trinomial. But if you just started to do this now, it's going to be difficult because 6 has 2 different factor pairs, 6 and 1 or 3 and 2. 20 has 3 different factor pairs, 20 and 1, 10 and 2, or 5 and 4. So what can I always try first? GCF. Is there a GCF? Yeah, 2. So if I take a 2 out of all these terms first, I'm not done. I still have to factor this trinomial, but it's a whole lot easier because the only way to split 3x squared up now is 3x and x. Okay? And then I just have to figure out, okay, what do I do with the 10? Now we got to be careful here because 10 is positive, which means the signs have to be the same. So I'm going to try 5 and 2. That'll give me 5x and 6x. and I can get 11 if they're both negative, and that's going to work because a negative times negative will give me positive. So here's my factorization, and now I just have to figure out what makes each of these 0. Now again, 2 is 2. 2 is a constant. It can't be 0. But 3x minus 5 could be 0. If I add 5 and then divide by 3, 5/3 is one of my solutions, or x minus 2 equals 0, and that's going to happen when x is 2. So there's my 2 solutions. But you see how that made this so much easier to factor, not having a 6 and a 20 there with all those factor pairs. So if you can pull out a GCF, it makes it way easier. Okay, last one, I promise. Okay, so 7x squared minus 8 equals negative 26x. Okay, now what's different about this one? I don't have 0 on the right-hand side. So you're going to get some problems like this. And if you want to use the strategy of using the 0 product rule, you have to get 0 on one side of the equation. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the 26x over to the other side. Now you remember, I'm actually adding 26x. When you put this over here, it's going to give you a trinomial. You want that to be in your middle term. When you're factoring a trinomial, you always want the square term, the x term, and then the constant, the number with no variable there. Okay? So now I go ahead and I try to factor this. Now 7's prime, so that makes it fairly easy. 7 and 1. 8's a little trickier because I could be using 8 and 1 or 4 and 2. But I think some of you guys might be sharp enough to realize that 4 times 7 is 28. And if I put 2 there, that's going to give me 28x and 2x. Because that's negative, they have to be different signs. Since I want positive 26, that would have to be positive, that would have to be negative. So negative and positive, and there I go. So now I have it factored. I just have to set each one equal to 0. 7x equals positive 2. Divide by 7. I get 2/7. Or x plus 4 equals 0. Add negative 4. X is negative 4. Okay? So you have a worksheet. Now today's worksheet's pretty easy because I think most of them are all trinomials. You just have to see if you can take a GCF out first, and you may get a couple like this where you don't have 0, and then you're going to want to move everything over so you have 0 on one side of your equation. Make sure your terms are lined up: squared term, x term, constant. Okay? All right. I'll see you on tomorrow's Zoom. Okay, guys? All righty. Bye-bye.